Welcome to Legat's presentation about Council's new policies and procedures. This is the new policy and procedure suite relating to workplace behaviour which your Council, following consultation with you, has decided to adopt. This presentation has been prepared by Legat for all the councils to use during their implementation of the new policies and procedures.
You will have already had an opportunity to read and consider all of the new policies and procedures. The purpose of this session is to further assist you to understand those documents and how they apply to you and your employment with Council. If you have any questions about the policies and procedures, you will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. You will then be asked to complete some comprehension test questions. If you have further queries or concerns about how the policies and procedures apply to you, it is important that you raise those concerns with your supervisor or manager and obtain the clarification that you need.
The new suite of Council policy and procedures relating to workplace behaviour is all about making sure you and the people you work with have the most productive and safe work environment. It also sets standards and provides processes for you to follow to ensure that your workplace behaviour is lawful and meets Council's expectations.
The policies relate to three main areas: misconduct, performance and resolution of issues relating to behaviour. The documents are set out in tiers. The policies sit on top, the procedures expand on the policies, and the advisory documents provide even more detail about how things are done at Council. In the next few slides, we're going to explain what a policy is, what a procedure is, and what an advisory document is.
So what is a policy? A policy is a central document in the document suite. It explains what Council is actually trying to do by introducing the policy, and it will give some explanation as to why it is necessary. The language in a policy will be fairly general because more detail is provided in the relevant procedure or the Tier 3 or advisory documents. For example, the Fitness for Work policy says that Council may manage an employee's fitness for work by implementing a Fitness for Work procedure. The details about when a fitness for work assessment by a doctor may be obtained and how that may be obtained are set out in the Fitness for Work procedure.
Council's policies apply to you as lawful and reasonable directions or instructions. They are different to your contract of employment, which creates contractual obligations that you must comply with. They are similar, however, in the sense that if you fail to follow a contractual obligation in your contract, or a policy which creates a lawful and reasonable direction, you could in either instance face disciplinary action, which could include termination of your employment. The main policies contained in Tier 1 for this suite of documents are Code of Conduct, Communications, Disciplinary, Fitness for Work, Issue Resolution, Performance Management, Work Health and Safety, and Workplace Behaviour. Predominantly, they all deal with workplace behaviour, but emphasise different types of behaviour and conduct. Each one deals with a particular topic area and tries to explain where there is a crossover or in what circumstances a different policy may apply. The key in all of this, whether you are clarifying your own obligations or considering whether a policy may have been breached, that is, not followed, is that you need to look at the specific wording of the particular policy to make sure it's the right one to deal with the issue.
Tier 2 documents. They contain a lot more detail on how to do something. They may contain a series of steps or a series of topics with a logical process to be followed. Again, procedures are not contractual in nature, but provide a good guide in terms of what your employer expects you to be doing and contain lawful and reasonable directions. The procedures in Tier 2 are disciplinary, fitness for work, issue resolution and performance management. Your Council may have a number of other procedures that you follow, but these are the procedures that are dealt with in the Workplace Behaviour Suite.
Advisory documents are known as Tier 3 documents, And as we discussed earlier, they may contain anything from data collection, the types of forms that are used to record incidents or accidents, or processes that you have used when going about your work. They may also contain guidance materials through the provision of specific examples. These may have been developed in your own council or where you have utilised a specific topic area from a third party, giving you guidance on general matters that are applicable to your council. Regardless of where the information is from, these documents can be referred to assist you to apply the specific wording of your policy. They certainly don't override the policy, but are an assistance or an advisory document to help you understand how to apply a particular policy.
Some advisory documents that you may be using include hazard and near-miss identification, risk assessments, guides, scorecards, decision registers, but as we said earlier, it can really include any documents that assist understanding in the application of a policy or procedure.
Each document really needs to be read by itself, but there are a number of key definitions and terms that apply consistently throughout all of the documents which we're now going to explain. It is of course difficult to provide you with an absolute definition for each one in this induction, and so whilst we're going to give you some general explanations in a summarised form, you do really need to go back and have a look at the particular words in each document. When you are reading and applying the policy, you will need to refer back to the definitions which are at the front of the document to find out what the terms mean for that document. All of the words used in the policies and procedures which have a capital letter will have a definition provided. Where the word policy or procedure is capitalised, the document is referring to the document being read at the time. Where the term policy or procedure is not capitalised, it refers to any other council policy or procedure.
The first term I would like to talk about is related council documents. They are listed at the front of the policy and will include the other policies and procedures in the Workplace Behaviours suite. This is because depending on the issue, one of these other documents may be relevant to management of an issue and may need to be referred to. This list may also include other documents that your particular council has that are related.
The term applicable law is meant to be read as broadly as possible. This will cover all of the legislation that applies to you. Now you may be concerned that you do not understand which laws apply to you, but think about matters like road safety. You may not actually know that you're applying a particular piece of legislation when you stop at a red stop sign, but there is an applicable law that sits behind that, and with all legislation, you don't need a specific reference that it applies to you, it just applies to you as a matter of course. Significantly, within the documents there are references to the types of legislation or the applicable laws that will apply to a particular topic area, but it won't cover absolutely everything.
The term infringing workplace behaviour is used extensively throughout the Workplace Behaviours suite. This can be anything you do or fail to do which amounts to a breach of a council policy, your contractual obligations, or misconduct at common law. The policies all set out what your obligations are. Failing to follow these obligations is a breach of the policy. Your contractual obligations are written in either your contract of employment or letter of engagement, but also can include obligations you have verbally agreed to or which can be implied. Misconduct at common law is a broad term that covers the types of behaviours where generally people have been in trouble in the past. For example, you may not find a term in your contract of employment or enterprise agreement that says you cannot do burnouts on a council oval, nor may you even find that mentioned in a policy. But generally, that behaviour would be recognised as misconduct at common law. It's the types of behaviour where generally people have been in trouble and encountered some type of action as a result of that behaviour.
The term manager, supervisor, is also meant to apply as broadly as possible. Your council may use terms such as team leader, coordinator, and similar other terminology, but generally the term simply means anyone with management or supervisory responsibilities for others. It is also important to recognise that the nominated or authorised delegate of that manager or supervisor has the same powers. That's important for when your manager or supervisor is away and they have given their responsibility or their authority to another person. Once they have done that, their previous authority or responsibility transfers to that next person and should be followed.
The term other person in the workplace is a term borrowed from the work health and safety legislation. It picks up people at the workplace such as ratepayers and visitors who may not have employee responsibility but nonetheless have to either follow the directions of the council at the time or the rules in place at your council.
The term worker is again a term borrowed from the work health and safety legislation. While you might ordinarily consider this to be an employment-related term, it isn't. It's a lot broader. It covers contractors, subcontractors, employees of those subcontractors and contractors, even volunteers and people on work experience. In fact, whenever you are doing work or performing work, you are a worker. It doesn't require an employment relationship to be formed, and that's why some of the policies are expressed to cover workers, and that means that people like contractors who come onto the workplace will generally be required to uphold and apply the particular council policy. The Work Health and Safety Policy, for example, applies to workers and other persons in the workplace, not just to employees. Some of the documents only apply to employees, but will impose obligations on employees to do things so that they don't create a risk to the safety of other workers or other persons in the workplace. For example, the Fitness for Work policy only applies to employees, but imposes an obligation on employees not to perform any work-related tasks that create an unreasonable risk to the health and safety of themselves, workers, or other people in the workplace.
Council can amend the policies and procedures at their discretion, but Council will generally consult with you as to any particular changes where required so that you can receive additional training and follow up with the implementation of any particular changes.
If you have any particular concerns about the interpretation of a policy, procedure or advisory document, it is incumbent upon you to seek that information from your manager or supervisor. Avoid the situation where you actually complete a task but are not sure whether such behaviour or conduct might breach a policy. The definition section in the policy and procedures will provide you with a lot more definitions, and as we discussed earlier, you should make yourselves aware of those specific definitions for each document.
Each policy sets out its purpose, the aim of the policy, that is what it is trying to do. For example, a purpose of the Code of Conduct is to provide a framework for employees to make decisions and engage in behaviours that are ethical and appropriate.
Policies and procedures do not only apply in the traditional workplace. They will also apply when you are in places that you may not consider to be your workplace, such as outside your office or outside the site in which you normally work. Certainly, policies cover and apply to behaviours you engage in when you are at the actual workplace or in connection with the work you do for Council if that is outside your workplace.
In addition to these policies and procedures that apply to conduct outside of the workplace or even outside of working hours, if the conduct is likely to cause serious damage to the relationship between Council and the worker or another person at the workplace, or the conduct is incompatible with your duties or your duty to Council, or the conduct damages or is likely to damage Council interests or its reputation. Now, applying that in a practical sense, if you look at the circles on your slide, you will see that in the office or in the work site, most people understand that as the workplace. As we broaden out, the coverage of the policy and procedure still continues, so it definitely covers you when you're outside of the office or your site doing office or site work, and that could be on a trip where there are tasks to be performed outside your normal place of work. It could also occur in between when you are going from site to site, or going between office to office when you are not actually doing any work but you are really only travelling. In those circumstances, the policy and procedure will still apply.
It will also cover you with office-related social functions. That may mean the end of your Christmas party, or it may be something such as a work barbecue. Finally, it also covers areas which are not traditionally considered the workplace, but for reasons which we mentioned earlier, are places where you may engage in behaviour that may impact on the performance of your work, or your relationship with the council, or other workers or other people at the workplace, and the council's reputation. This is particularly important in matters such as social media, where you may be at home and clearly not at work, but when you are writing about work or writing about a worker in that private space, unfortunately, it does have the potential to be part of your workplace, because what you say could damage council or your relationships with other employees, workers, or other people in the workplace. Failure to follow the policies and procedures in these circumstances can also amount to a breach, even though you were not at the work site or in your office when you engaged in that behaviour.
I am now going to make some comments in relation to each of the main areas covered by the Policy and Procedure Suite. Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct is a policy which provides instruction to employees about the standards of behaviour expected by council. It is not a full and final list of what employees must do or not do, but it is a good guide of council's broad expectations. Some of the fundamental rules set out in the Code of Conduct are as follows.
Employees must not accept bribes, kickbacks, inducements, or other illegal payments of any kind in connection with their work, ever. Employees must never offer or accept a gift that creates an obligation or which may be reasonably construed as favouritism, discrimination, collusion, or other unacceptable practice. You must not undertake any action that may bring the council's integrity or reputation into disrepute. You can only take and use council property for private purposes where your manager or supervisor has authorised you to do so. You must tell your manager or supervisor as soon as you become aware of a possible conflict of interest and provide your manager or supervisor with all the relevant information. You must not use or disclose confidential information without consent or for any personal gain. And finally, you are responsible for your own behaviour.
Communications Policy. The Communications Policy sets out council's expectations of employees when using communication devices in the workplace. For work or in ways that could impact on council or other employees when using council-owned communication devices and when using social media. Communication device is defined, but in simple terms includes mobile phones and computers. Some of the main directions set out in the communication policy are as follows.
The council may provide employees with council-owned communication devices, in which case the council has the discretion to decide the levels of business use and or reasonable personal use of the device by the employee. The council can also remove, restrict or amend your ability to use a council-owned communication device or a personal communication device that's used in the workplace or for business use, where it's reasonable to do so. Council or its representatives can monitor your use of council-provided communications devices without notice. With regard to social media, you may be given authority to use social media for business purposes. This authority may be provided by your role, position description, communication protocols, or contractual arrangements, and you must comply with the level of authorisation that's provided. You must not use any communication device in a way that has the capacity to cause damage to the council or to another worker's reputation, or damage to your ability to work with other workers or people in the workplace. You may only use council logos, branding, photos, images or trademarks with prior council approval.
The disciplinary policy explains how council may manage employees who have engaged in infringing workplace behaviour. This includes poor performance that is not dealt with under council's performance management policy. The disciplinary policy does not apply to issues which are dealt with by council as incapacity for work issues, because these are dealt with under the fitness for work policy. Responsibility for ensuring appropriate management of infringing workplace behaviours under the disciplinary policy rests with managers and supervisors. Employees are responsible for their own behaviours and participating appropriately in the disciplinary process.
Both employees and managers or supervisors share the responsibility of identifying any support, training or experience opportunities which may assist you to avoid infringing workplace behaviour. Disciplinary processes are serious matters, and before the council commences a process, they need to have formed a reasonable suspicion that an employee has engaged in infringing workplace behaviour. Council may use a particular disciplinary process that a manager or supervisor considers reasonable in the circumstances, that is consistent with the disciplinary procedure, and provides a level of procedural fairness appropriate to the circumstances.
The purpose of the Fitness for Work policy and procedure is to set out how council will manage employees' fitness for work to ensure that council provides a safe and healthy workplace. It is important that employees understand that they are not required to attend work if they are not fit to perform their duties. In fact, employees must ensure that they do not perform duties if they are not fit to do so, because doing so may put the safety of others at risk. If you have a temporary ongoing incapacity, injury or illness, or are taking medication which affects your ability to meet the inherent requirements of your role, or may place the safety of you or others at risk, you must notify your manager or supervisor.
Sometimes the council will have reasonable grounds to provide employees with an instruction to see a doctor who can provide the council with an opinion about the employee's fitness for work. If this happens, the employee is required to comply with that direction. Employees are also required to participate in meetings with council that are reasonably necessary to assess or manage risks to safety relating to fitness for work.
If you have concerns regarding the fitness for work of another employee or persons in the workplace, they are required to tell your manager or supervisor about your concerns. Where the council has reasonably identified that the work or workplace is creating a risk to an employee's health or safety, the council may obtain advice from a medical or allied medical health practitioner to determine appropriate action to manage the issue.
All information related to fitness for work is considered sensitive and should be treated as strictly confidential. Employees are required to comply with reasonable and lawful directions that are necessary to assess or manage risks to safety which arise from or relate to fitness for work, which may include attending assessments to determine fitness for work or providing information in a reasonable time frame.
The issue resolution policy and procedure provides flexible approaches that can be used to resolve issues in the workplace as soon as practicable and without unnecessary formality, to prevent unnecessary escalation and to promote fairness all round for all parties. Responsibility for ensuring appropriate management of issues under the issue resolution procedure rests with managers and supervisors. Employees and others in the workplace are responsible for their own behaviours, including reasonably raising or responding to and resolving issues.
Complaints must not be raised under the issue resolution procedure that are vexatious, falsely made, frivolous, or without reasonable grounds. If you become involved in an issues resolution procedure, you are required to participate in the procedure fairly. Council can utilise the issue resolution procedure not only where an issue has been raised by a worker or another person in the workplace, but where a manager or a supervisor has become aware of an issue, or an issue exists where it is appropriate to use the procedure.
Council may use a particular issue resolution process that a manager or supervisor considers reasonable in the circumstances. This may involve utilising a process that is requested by the worker or other person at the workplace raising an issue, if that is applicable, or using a different process without their agreement. Unless other relevant circumstances exist, the issue resolution process is conducted by a manager or supervisor at the lowest possible level.
The performance management policy and procedure are about managing the performance of employees to ensure that performance is continually improving and identifying training and development needs. Managers and supervisors are responsible for managing and reviewing employees' performance to assist them to continuously improve, to be effective, and to ensure appropriate management of poor performance.
Employees are responsible for their own performance, including the requirements of their role for effective performance. Employees are responsible for identifying the appropriate support, training, experience and opportunities to improve performance. Council may use a particular performance management process or tool or combination that a manager or supervisor considers reasonable in the circumstances to ensure compliance with role requirements or expectations or other policies and procedures. These may include meetings, positive reinforcement, positive and negative feedback, different methods of communicating expectations, coaching, training or performance management plans, all of which set out in detail in the performance management procedure.
The Work Health and Safety Policy recognises Council's commitment to providing a safe and healthy workplace for everyone in the workplace whose health and safety could be at risk through Council work. The policy aims to direct and guide you about what action is considered reasonably practicable to protect health and safety.
Your work health and safety obligations are to meet your duty of care obligations, be accountable for your own safety, and be accountable for the safety of others at the workplace. Managers and supervisors are required to reasonably promote this policy within their area of responsibility and take reasonable steps to ensure that any potential breaches of this policy are identified, taken seriously and acted on appropriately. An aim of the workplace behaviour policy is to ensure that you understand your obligations and do not engage in infringing workplace behaviour. One of the matters that the policy addresses is discrimination. Discrimination is behaviour that favours one particular individual or group over others based on an attribute. The attributes are all set out in the policy, but they include things such as race, disability, gender, age and religious affiliation. Discrimination can occur whether the attribute is known, imputed or assumed, and can be either direct or indirect. Discrimination is unlawful and will not be tolerated by Council.
Actionable adverse action can occur where a person engages in adverse action or threatens or organises or coerces others to take adverse action. Adverse action is unlawful and will not be tolerated by Council. It may relate to action that is taken, for example, because an employee has exercised a workplace right or engaged in industrial activity. Examples of adverse action may be termination of employment or where a manager has approved a non-union member's application for annual leave over a union member's. Workplace harassment is conduct which offends, humiliates, intimidates, insults or ridicules another person on the basis of protected attributes in circumstances where a reasonable person having regard to all of the circumstances, would have anticipated that the other person would be offended, humiliated, intimidated, insulted or ridiculed.
Workplace harassment requires an attribute to be present and can be a one-off occurrence, and a specific intent or motive is not necessary. Sexual harassment is any unwanted or unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature which is unreasonable in the circumstances and which a reasonable person, having regard to all the circumstances, would have anticipated that the other person would be offended, humiliated, intimidated, insulted or ridiculed by.
For example, it could be sexual harassment to send pornographic or obscene emails to a colleague, even if you think it is funny. Even if sending pornographic or obscene emails to a colleague was not unlawful sexual harassment, it is behaviour which is inappropriate in a workplace and would not be tolerated by council and would breach the workplace behaviour policy. Other examples of sexual harassment may include deliberate or unnecessary physical contact, such as patting, pinching and fondling, requests for sexual favours, sexually orientated jokes, or tales of sexual performance.
Bullying is repeated or unreasonable behaviour directed towards one person or a group of people which creates a risk to health and safety. Examples include aggressive or abusive language, finger pointing, eye rolling and scowling, or delivering negative feedback in front of co-workers. Reasonable management action which is carried out in a reasonable manner is not bullying. A performance management plan or negative feedback could be reasonable management action if it is carried out in a reasonable manner.
Inappropriate workplace behaviour is any behaviour by workers or other people at the workplace that the council reasonably considers is not appropriate workplace behaviour or is unacceptable in the workplace. These behaviours will also breach the workplace behaviour policy. The workplace behaviour policy also deals with victimisation. Victimisation is when a person subjects or threatens to subject another person or an associate of that other person at the workplace to any detriment because they have, for example, made or intend to make a complaint. For example, it may be victimisation if a person's employment was terminated because they made a complaint about somebody else under the issue resolution policy.
Vilification is conduct that incites physical harm, hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule towards a worker or group of workers or other persons at the workplace on the basis of race, sexuality, disability or religion. An example of vilification would be speaking about a person's race or sexual orientation, for example, in a way that could make other people hate or ridicule them. The workplace behaviour policy also makes it clear that council will not tolerate violence such as threats of physical harm or assaults in the workplace or in circumstances relating to work.
So that now concludes our presentation. As we've said, if you have any queries or concerns about the policies and procedures or the information that we've presented you with today, you will need to discuss those matters with your manager or your supervisor. You will also now need to complete the questionnaire that you've been provided with, and again, if you have any difficulty in doing that, then you should speak with your supervisor or manager.